Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I'm Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Shruthi Rajasekar, who is an extraordinary composer and vocalist. Shruthi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm so excited to talk to you, and especially also about the work that you've done with the Schubert Club, who's one of our great creative partners and helped us to co-curate this particular show. But I thought it would be great is if first we could kind of just get a sense of the artistry that you do as a composer, as a vocalist, if you could kind of share kind of what that encompasses for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my practice involves Indian classical music as well as Western classical music. So I grew up in a household of South Indian classical music or Carnatic music. My mother, Nirmala Rajasekar, is a Carnatic musician. And so that's my first language of music, really, when it comes to, if we think about music as languages that we learn, I would say I'm a native speaker of Carnatic music. And I grew up in that environment and went to India often to learn and immerse myself more. And then it was really through school mostly that I learned about Western classical music and those kinds of spaces and being in school ensembles. And I also studied some piano as well. So that introduction came more through kind of the educational institutions of the country. But today I kind of bring those two worlds together.
It's amazing, and as you look at this, and between kind of the South Indian classical Carnatic and Western, what would you describe as kind of the core differences, both either in terms of the structure and or the approach or how it's appreciated by an audience?
That's a great question. So, I mean, in terms of the theory, the way we analyze the two systems, I would say Carnatic music is more of you have a kind of a melody line that's accompanied by almost like a band, the ensemble works. So you kind of have a lead instrument, and then everybody is working together, though, to create the experience the way they do in popular music or other forms of music. So a lot of it isn't actually written down. I would say there's a structure of the composition that gets taught to you and variations on a particular line. But then there's a lot of space for creativity from the people on stage. So there isn't quite a distinction between performer and composer, as at least not a stark of one as we have pretend to have in Western classical music. Another difference is that Carnatic music isn't necessarily a harmonic musical system. So it has a lot of rules governing it, governing raga, which is the melody side of things, and thala, which is the rhythm side. It can get very, very complex as a musical system, but it has a different set of priorities. So those are some differences. The last thing, I thought you brought up a really great point, which is how we appreciate or how we listen to the two different systems of music. So Carnatic music calls for a lot of interaction, I would say, between audience and performer. Traditionally, you don't choose the repertoire beforehand. You're supposed to react to what the audience is sending you in terms of their energy. So very different from preparing a printed program and program notes for a Western classical music project. And I think that spirit of spontaneity is something that I really value. And I think I've learned a lot from my gurus, from my teachers of that system, and try to bring that air of creativity and even giving performers the ability to create in my composition. So there's often aleatoric portions, or there's places where I ask them to be a co-creator with me, because I come from that kind of band system of working together to make the music.
It's absolutely awesome. And then, of course, kind of bringing the, aspects and influences, it seems, from both forms together, truly extraordinary, and it's led to you creating this wonderful and amazing program for the Schubert Club. And wondering, could you kind of describe that kind of and how that came about and was ultimately able to manifest?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks to your previous question, I'm realizing that some of the things that I had done in the show I hadn't thought about as having an Indian cultural approach, but they're very much there, principally in the way we involve the audience actually in the show. So I was very keen that this project, I was very honored to receive the opportunity to curate it. And I was very keen that the spotlight should be on my community, specifically the South Asian community here in the Twin Cities, here in Minnesota. And this is the community that raised me and had a huge impact on my music, even though um, a lot of the influence came directly from my mother as my music teacher and kind of my role model. I would say all the cultural elements had an impact on me too. And there's all these people who kind of made me an artist, I think, and inspired me to become an artist. So keeping that in mind, I wanted to create a show that brought all these elements together. And we did this through some creative ways. We knew that the Schubert Club is a chamber music organization, and I decided to involve 200 artists. So how does 200 artists and chamber work together? That was the question that we set for ourselves, a challenge that we set for ourselves. And we decided to film artists kind of doing their natural practice, whatever that looks like. We also requested people to send in films if they had site-specific work. And we compiled it all together and we created a story, a narrative based around these films. So that was the starting point. So we showed real people doing real work and spending time together. But then we created a story of a fictional character who was supposedly friends with all these people and her journey and realizing that arts doesn't look like one thing. That was the primary message that we were saying. She happens to be somebody who does more of what we might call the classical or traditional art forms, but then someone comes into her life who sort of changes her view on what art can look like, what it even means to learn or make art. And she goes through this journey together. So it was a story of our community, but we sort of merged reality and some fiction to tell this story.
It is absolutely beautiful and amazing. And did you find that you met your goals with the audience? And how was the audience engagement?
That's an incredible question. First of all, I have never heard so much from an audience after a show, which was a real shot in the arm for sure, but also caused a lot of thinking. You know, what is the post experience of a show like this? I was very keen that this be kind of a experience that you had to come and see in person, especially during the pandemic. We've had a lot of virtual things, beautiful virtual things born out of the pandemic. But I really wanted that live experience for everyone in the audience. And the other thing is I knew it was just going to be one show from the start. And so that was something that was really special and important, is to get people into the room first. And we did lots of things to make that happen. You know, we served food during intermission, a lot of good, tasty Indian food. We had actually a surprise third act. Aside from this first half and the second half, we had kind of a flash mob style South Asian young a cappella group that was singing kind of Bollywood music with other influences. So that was another way of bringing people in. We had this incredible painter, Takumba Aiken, who is, you know, one of the US's titans when it comes to painting, who is incredible at painting live while we have musicians playing. So we had the ensemble Maitri, who's worked with the Schubert Club a lot and with whom I have a close connection, creating this amazing music that sort of sits between new music, Indian classical music, and other traditions of the world, with Takumba interpreting what they were doing live. And we had a big screen so you could see the painting. So that way, if you're somebody who's interested in a different kind of art, you're still invited into this concert space. We had a coloring station for kids throughout the event. So if anybody needed to step outside, kids and adults, I think, frequented that one. And I think the biggest thing of all, of course, was actually having these artists be on stage with us within the chamber format, which is how we did it with the screen. I think what I also learned is that I hope this is just the start of initiatives like this. And that was really important to me, to make introductions between the Schubert Club and some important community cultural associations in town who might not have had anything to do with Western classical music organizations before, but I wanted them to meet each other. I wanted them to have that time with each other. And I do think that I also learned, when trying to do something as inclusive as this, there's always going to be more we can do. And there's always going to be more I can learn about. Like, for example, with the artists we filmed, I think more than half of them weren't even people I knew beforehand, which is super cool because the community has just exploded in size. But I think there will be even more people that we can include. The tent can be even bigger, even more inclusive. And so I appreciate learning that and learning that in the aftermath. Who else can we include in the story that we're telling? But I think you can't do it unless you start somewhere. You have to start somewhere first. So that's what I learned, I would say.
Absolutely. Well, it's such an extraordinary adventure, and clearly that impact that you've had that will now have a lasting impact moving forward is very, very clear. This is amazing work that you do. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all my guests, right, this work, it's so amazing. It's inspiring what you've shared, and especially, bringing in new communities and the partnerships and obviously ultimately the impact for your audiences. But there's probably got to be some tough days, or especially managing all of these different components when things may seem like the challenges can't be overcome. And just wondering, as like an arts leader, do you have any processes or approaches that you use when you're in the midst of kind of those toughest of times?
That's an amazing question, and I would say I'm very early on that walk of leadership. So I appreciate you calling me that, but I think I'm very much learning as I go. Um, when I was wondering about ways that we could make this more inclusive, and when I was getting feedback and trying to incorporate all of it while still balancing my central vision with the show and not trying to make it too many disparate points, I had a couple people who sent me some beautiful emails, actually, that were kind of in the nature of, and I got one in front of me right here, actually, on my wall, but they were in the nature of, just keep walking this road. It is a long road. It isn't done with one event. It isn't done with just one instance. We have to keep working at it, keep trying at it. And I basically just printed those out, I would say, and kept them on my wall just to look at whenever I needed a boost of inspiration. But I think I worked with some incredible people on this project, including the playwright I collaborated with, Sravya Tarapalli, who does work in like human rights and making sure that we're protecting against rising nationalism and lots of important things. And so when I see the work that people like activists like that do, I think that is what gives me inspiration as an artist to try to do whatever I can in my artistic space. Yeah, I don't say that I'm an activist because I think that requires a lot of work on the ground, as you well know from the things that you have done. But I think taking inspiration from the people around us, leaning on them when we need help, and asking for help have been the things that have supported me through this.
Shruthi Rajasekar, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.